However, what they have done is done a positive conspiracy. It's like your home team won the Super Bowl by putting drugs in the Gatorade of the other team and making them lethargic. And if I try to prove that, you're ready to punch me in the face. So what we're trying to do in this instance is not reveal a slightly different truth, even though, Kennedy is dead but killed by this person. 9/11 did happen but done by this person. We're trying to say this great candy is not candy, and we're trying to take it away from people. And basically the good thing is that 4 out of 5 people who watch a funny thing happened on the way to the moon, who previously thought that the moon landings are real, reversed their mind. I mean, I've got a security guard in my building. He found out who I was. He said, "You're insulting me. You're insulting the military. How dare you say that?" I gave him a copy of my film, and I didn't really expect anything of it. And he immediately said, "I'm sorry. I agree that the moon landings are fake." If you want to put one link, Sean, in the description of your video, put the link to that article from the Sleuth Journal, which basically said this: did astronauts go 1,000 times farther 50 years ago than they can today? That one sentence proves they didn't go. And that link has all the reasons why they didn't go, as well as links to all the films. And if you want to show one picture at this point, go to the part about 30 minutes or so into the film where we show the shadows, and show the last shadow. In fact, I'm going to assume you're showing it while I'm describing this. You see the astronaut shadow is going at 12 o'clock. And then you see the shadow of a rock going at 9 o'clock. Now, these two objects are 5 feet apart from one another. This just dawned on me like 2 weeks ago, Sean. This is all the proof that we need to prove that the moon landings are fake. Yeah, I got a secret tape with the CIA telling them not to answer questions until 4 seconds go by to prove, that they're farther away from the moon, from the Earth than they really were, and they never left Earth orbit. What a surprise. 50 years later, they still cannot leave Earth orbit. But look at this one picture. I mean, they claim, and then put beside it the one that precedes it, which is the shadows of the 2 telephone poles, going the same direction. The sun is 93 million miles away. It's 1,000 times the diameter of the Earth. So all the shadows, if you go out in a parking lot, during the day, high noon, no clouds, your shadow and your friend's shadow, they will never, ever, ever, ever intersect. And yet in this picture, 2 objects, 5 feet apart, intersect at 90 degrees, which means it was shot with electrical light, which means it was on Earth. End of story. This one picture is all that you need. Out of all the films out there on the internet that try to reassure the public that the moon landings are real when they're not, they never, ever can argue out this photograph. They never mention it. This one photograph from Apollo 14 proves they did not go to the moon. Now, the idea that they went with secret crews and communed with aliens, they don't care why you think they have the capability to go to the moon, only that you do. And believe me, they cannot go today, so it would be simply impossible for them to have gone with 1960s technology on the first attempt. It's simply impossible.
Well, I do want to say this, Bart. I think that one of the most important things I can share with people who are skeptical about whether we went or didn't go is that NASA, in its own words, with NASA astronaut Don Pettit, said that they have since destroyed all of the technology that got them to the moon, and it would be a painful process to build it back again. Now, does that make any sense? I'll play that clip right here.
I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond. The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again.
And then there's this clip, Bart, which you know very well, in which one of these NASA scientists, who was around during the NASA missions, by the way, says that they lost all of the telemetry data that would prove conclusively that NASA actually went to the moon and landed there and returned men safely to Earth.
I haven't seen anything that indicates the telemetry data is even in existence, and as I said, even if we had it, we don't have the machines to play it back.
But your own research has shown the telemetry data is missing.
That's right.
It's just nonsensical, Bart. It's nonsensical. It doesn't add up. Their story just doesn't add up. And then you've got the Van Allen radiation belts to deal with. You've got the whole idea of trying to safely land the lunar lander with reverse thrusters. They couldn't do it on Earth in practice, but they did it successfully, they say, the very first time and repeatedly on the moon. It just, none of it adds up, Bart.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that first clip, or the clip that you just showed with Don Pettit. By the way, I sent him a big coupon. I think it was $300 for Ruth Chris Steakhouse because I really appreciate what he had to say. And basically, he's saying that they spent $150 billion in today's dollars on the technology to go to the moon on the first attempt. And then they took all the equipment and all the schematics and they threw them in a furnace. Now, if you can point out one time in the entire history of the world when a technological advancement, like let's say the locomotive or the airplane or the nuclear bomb or an airplane that can fly faster than the speed of sound or the first computer, that any technology that they developed, that once they were done, they threw it and all the designs in a furnace. Now, if you can show me one time in history that that has happened before, then I'll say publicly that the moon landings are real. In fact, if you could show me, go out in the sun and have that astronaut shadow go 12 o'clock and the other one, go 9 o'clock in the sunlight, I'll say the moon landings are real. The fact that they destroyed all the information is proof itself that they didn't go. Because if they really went, the last thing they would do, Sean, would be to destroy the technology. I mean, the nuclear bomb, that technology should have been destroyed after World War II, but now nuclear bombs are 500 times more powerful. So if they really went to the moon, the last thing on Earth they would destroy would be the technology and the schematics, unless they were covering their tracks after faking it so that no one would be able to figure out that the rocket didn't have enough fuel, the batteries didn't have enough to power air conditioning against 250 degrees, and the computers were not fast enough to synchronize from 0 mile per hour to 4,000 miles per hour in lunar orbit like they claim to have done. The fact that they did destroy the technology is proof itself that it was a fraud, because if they really went, they would have never done that. Now, the other clip you might want to show is of Kelly Smith, and you probably remember this now that I mention it. We can just show the clip here.
As we get further away from Earth, we'll pass through the Van Allen belts, an area of dangerous radiation. Radiation like this could harm the guidance systems, onboard computers, or other electronics on Orion. Naturally, we have to pass through this danger zone twice, once up and once back. Sensors aboard will record radiation levels for scientists to study. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space.
Kelly Smith just said that the technology to pass through the Van Allen radiation belts has yet to be invented.
We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space.
And most people don't realize this, but about 1,000 miles up is a layer of radiation, anywhere from 25 to 35,000 miles thick, that they would have to go through to reach the moon and back. In fact, it's the only time in human history where humans are said to have gone through the radiation. So the Orion project 3 years ago sent up a spacecraft into the radiation belts with 2 Geiger counters, U-turned and came back, and to read those Geiger counter readings. Not only did Kelly Smith say it's dangerous radiation, he says we must first develop protection before we can send people through this region of space, meaning the technology to go through the radiation belts with humans on board and survive has yet to be invented. I'm going to go ahead and mention something special. I will tie in a new video, digitized, edited, and ready to go, that someone sent me from like 1958 or 59 or 61. I don't know the exact year because on the reel of footage you can't tell, but it has even the countdown before it. It's a television program, I think, called Science Today, in which they went into great detail about the radiation belts. The inner belt is more than 7,000 times a safe dose, and the outer belt is more than 70,000 times a safe dose. They say so on national TV. I just got the reel and I just uploaded it. It's a private link, and we'll go ahead and tie it in with this. I'll put it on your channel, my channel, wherever. And it shows that the radiation belt is insurmountable. And even George Bush Jr., clever as he was, during one of the moon anniversaries, he says we're going to return to the moon as a logical first step to Mars and beyond after we learn how to protect astronauts from the lethal radiation. Well, wait a minute. You need to learn that first. And if we already did it 6 times, why would we go from a bicycle back to a tricycle? Why would it be a logical first step to Mars and beyond if we were already there 6 times?
Yeah. You know, one of the technological parallels I'd want to share with people as they think this through, if you talk about the Apollo missions and you take a look at, for instance, SpaceX, and I want to ask you about SpaceX and Elon Musk in a second, but the point I want to make is, think of that clip of Michael Douglas from the movie Wall Street, standing on the beach with that big, giant cell phone as big as a loaf of bread, and now take a look at the iPhone in your pocket today. So if cell phone technology was built on the back of that big loaf of bread sized cell phone as seen in that movie, and it's advanced to this point now, a cell phone, an iPhone, with more computing power than apparently they had available to even send men to the moon and back, right in your pocket, we're to believe that they destroyed all of that technology. But now we have SpaceX, which is built on the back of what technology? What do you make of SpaceX and Elon Musk and the claims? Now SpaceX is saying that they're going to send men to the moon here. Your thoughts on SpaceX?
Well, it's a front. It's a government front for the NSA, CIA, something like that, and he's one of those token people. And I think Trump found out about it, and that's why he's prosecuting him for saying the stock was going to go up or down or whatever prematurely and in a way that he could sell his stock once it was high.
Just to clarify, he was saying that he had the funding in place to take Tesla private at $420 a share, and that was untrue. He did not have the funding in place. So that's what he paid, I believe, several $20 million fines for, and had to step down as, I believe, the CEO or the chairman, one or the other. He remains. Yeah. He was duly spanked for that.
Yeah, I know. $20 million to him, that's going to eat into his cheeseburger budget. But one of the interesting things about him is that he and his company was able to land a rocket vertically. However, it took them at least 5 attempts. Now, most people don't know this, but the space shuttle has 5 onboard computers because the thing cannot be flown manually. It's impossible because it's so aerodynamically sensitive to come in and glide on that exact spot that it cannot be done manually. A computer does it, and they have one computer and 4 backup computers because if all those computers fail, the thing will crash. And so you have to have this incredible computer processing power in order to land something vertically. Why you would do it in the first place instead of a parachute is, to me, completely illogical.
I agree,
it's just a waste of fuel.
It is. Well, I agree, and I don't understand. I agree, and I think that some of that footage looks suspect. I'm not 100,000% convinced that they're actually successfully doing that. And you're right, it doesn't add up. Just the fuel costs alone and the carry load of that extra fuel to do that. It just doesn't add up, in my opinion.
Well, maybe they were doing it because it is a test for a lunar landing vehicle to be used for the first time. The greater point is this. Let's just assume that those landings are real. It still took them at least 5, and might have been more, before they did it successfully for the first time, and I think that was last year. So basically, we have the very first vertical landing rocket occurred in 2017, not in 1969 on the very first attempt. Do you understand that? Because that was a vertical rocket, allegedly, landing on the moon that Neil Armstrong couldn't even fly successfully. The best pilot in the world could not fly that successfully on Earth, much less in the unproven environment of 1/6 gravity, in the lunar atmosphere. So when he allegedly descended vertically, and yet it took them up until 2017, 48 years later, before they could land a rocket vertically again, it's proof that it didn't happen. I mean, Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic in 1927. Would it be 50 years before any nation on Earth would be able to fly across the Atlantic in an airplane? And yet that's what we're told to believe. 50 years later, there were millions and millions of aircraft had been built that broke the sound barrier, that flew up to 20 miles high, that were 747s, the size of a condo building, with multiple units being lifted off of the ground. In fact, the 747 was developed a decade later with a decade newer technology than Apollo, and it still took a year and a half longer than going to the moon for the first time, and it took 162 engine failures before they could lift that fuselage off the ground. And yet, the most complicated flying mission ever designed worked on the first occasion, which has never happened in the history of aviation, not even with the simplest machine, the Wright brothers motorized kite. I don't know how many times it took for them to get off the ground, just a few feet, but it took many times. And yet they're saying the most complicated flying machine, the most complicated flying mission of all time in the entire history of aerospace worked on the first occasion when a 747 built with 10 years better technology after millions of aircraft had already been built took 162 engine failures before the 163rd one lifted the fuselage off the ground.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this then. Musk is saying that he wants to launch the first humans to Mars in 2024. Your thoughts on the plausibility of Elon Musk sending people to Mars in 2024?
Well, I wish I had money to bet opposite of that. If I had someone who would take me up on it, I could become a trillionaire with $1 because I would give them 1,000,000,000 to 1 odds on that one. What they're using is the wimpy technology. The wimpy technology is the character from Popeye where he says, "I'll pay you for that hamburger next Tuesday." Let me tell you this. After the last alleged moon mission in 1972 and 1978, they said we'll have men back on the moon by 1980. 1980, they said we'll have men on the moon in 90. And 90, they said 2000. And 2000, they said 2010. And 2010, they said 2020. And now they're saying in 2018, we might have men on the moon by 2030. I mean, come on. It's like a mirage you never get to, and people forget. I mean, Comedy Central, that show, The Daily Report or whatever, which was surprisingly open-minded, even though it was pro-Democrat, they pointed out time and time again the idiocy of the Democratic Party as well as the Republican Party. And they had on these clips about how we're going to deal with the immigration problem next year. And they started talking about this in the 70s. They had a clip of a guy saying we'll do it next year in the 70s, next year in the 80s, next year in the 90s, next year in 2000, next year in 2010. And it's the same wimpy theology that they're using to return to the moon, go to Mars. They make this goal in the future. Everyone forgets about it. And then at that time, they make another goal into the future. It's this mirage we never get to. I mean, they just now learned how to land a rocket vertically, which they'd have to do to land on the moon because you can't use balloons or parachutes because there's no air. And they just now are figuring out a way to possibly go through the Van Allen radiation belts, and it gets better. I call up NASA and I said, "Hey, I'm a journalist with the Sleuth Journal. I'd like to interview Kelly Smith." "Oh, no, that's forbidden." And rightly so, right? He's not available for any interviews after, oops, he acknowledged that the moon landings were fake. And then I said, okay, that's all right. I understand you had 2 Geiger counters on board here to measure the radiation, which I'm about to show you a video in which the inner belt is 7,000 times an acceptable dose and the outer belt is 70,000 times an acceptable dose. And I said, can I please have those Geiger counter readings? And get this, Sean, here's what they said. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Sibrel, that information is classified." And I'm like, oh? When they sent probes to measure the temperature of the sun, that was not classified. When they sent probes, taxpayer funded, to Jupiter to find out how much helium is in Jupiter's atmosphere, that was not classified. So why would a measurement of nature, simply the amount of radiation in the radiation belts, why would that information be classified? There's no reason whatsoever, unless disclosing it would prove that the astronauts never went through it to reach the moon.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the problem with this topic as it relates to NASA and truthiness is that the story is a little bit like the official story of 9/11, Bart. It doesn't stand up to scrutiny if you examine it on a point-by-point basis. There's too many flaws and too many questions and contradictions in the official story from my perspective.